Continuing Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. In the fourth program of Pericles, aren't we? In the 9th month, which, is closer to December rather than Ramadan, the Samians, surrendering themselves and delivering up the town, Pericles pulled down their walls and seized their shipping and set a fine of a large sum upon them, part of which they paid down at once, and they agreed to bring in the rest by a certain time, and gave hostages for security. Dryden the Samian makes a tragical drama out of these events, charging the Athenians and Pericles with a great deal of cruelty, which neither Thucydides nor Ephorus nor Aristotle have given any relation of, and probably with little regard to truth, how, for example, he brought the captains and soldiers of the galleys into the marketplace at Miletus, and there, having bound them fast to boards for 10 days, then, when they were already all but half dead, gave order to have them killed by beating out their brains with clubs, and their dead bodies to be flung out into the open streets and fields unburied. Almost sounds like there is ritual significance to the duration and stuff. Dryden, however, who, even where he has no private feeling concerned, is not wont to keep his narratives within the limits of truth, is the more likely upon this occasion to have exaggerated the calamities which befell his country, to create odium against the Athenians. Pericles, however, after the reduction of Samos, returning back to Athens, took care that those who died in the war should be honorably buried, and made a funeral harangue, as the custom is, in their commendation at their graves, for which he gained great admiration. As he came down from the stage on which he spoke, the rest of the women came and complimented him, taking him by the hand and crowning him with garlands and ribbons, like a victorious athlete in the games. But Elpinique, coming nearer to him, said, "These are brave deeds, Pericles, that you have done, and such as deserve our chaplets, who have lost as us many a worthy citizen, not in a war with the Phoenicians or Medes, like my brother Cimon, but for the overthrow of an allied and kindred city." As Elpinique spoke these words, he, smiling quietly, as it is said, returned her answer with this verse: "Old women should not seek to be perfumed." Eon says of him that upon this exploit of his, conquering the Samians, he indulged very high and proud thoughts of himself, whereas Agamemnon was 10 years taking a barbarous city. He had, in 9 months' time, vanquished and taken the greatest and most powerful of the Aeonians, and indeed it was not without reason that he assumed this glory to himself, for in real truth there was much uncertainty and great hazard in this great war, if so be, as Thucydides tells us, the Samian state were within a very little of wresting the whole power and domination and dominion of the sea out of the Athenians' hands. After this was over, the Peloponnesian War beginning to break out in full tide, he advised the people to send help to the Corians, who were attacked by the Corinthians, and to secure themselves an island possessed of great naval resources, since the Peloponnesians were already all but in actual hostilities against them, the people readily consenting to the motion, and voting an aid and succor for them. He dispatched the Lacedaemonius, Cimone's son, having only 10 ships with him, as it were, out of a design to affront him, for there was a great kindness and friendship betwixt Cimone's family and the Lacedaemonians, so in order that Lacedaemonius might lie the more open to a charge or suspicion at least of favoring the Lacedaemonians and playing false, if he performed no considerable exploit in this service, he allowed him a small number of ships and sent him out against his will, and indeed he made it somewhat his business to hinder Cimone's sons from rising in the state, professing that by their very names they were not to be looked upon as native and true Athenians, but foreigners and strangers, one being called Lacedaemonius, another Thessalus, and the third Eleus, and they were all 3 of them, it was thought, born of an Arcadian woman, being however ill spoken of on account of these 10 galleys, as having afforded but a small supply to the people that were in need, and yet given a great advantage to those who might complain of the act of intervention. Pericles sent out a larger force afterwards to Corcyra, which arrived after the fight was over, and now the Corinthians, angry and indignant with the Athenians, accused them publicly at Lacedaemon. The Megarians joined with them, complaining that they were contrary to common right, and the articles of peace sworn to among the Greeks, kept out and driven away from every market and from all ports under the control of the Athenians. The Aeginetans also, professing to be ill-used and treated with violence, made supplications in private to the Lacedaemonians for redress, though not daring openly to call the Athenians in question. In the meantime also the city Patidaa, under the dominion of the Athenians, but a colony formerly of the Corinthians, had revolted and was beset with a formal siege, and was a further occasion of precipitating the war. Now, these are English characters and stuff, so if I mispronounce the Greek, the English characters may not even get me in the right, there may be characters added or omitted that would have been important for pronouncing it right. So, yet notwithstanding all this, there being embassies sent to Athens, and Archidamus, the king of the Lacedaemonians, endeavoring to bring the greater part of the complaints and matters in dispute to a fair determination, and to pacify and allay the heats of the allies, it is very likely that the war would not, upon any other grounds of quarrel, have fallen upon the Athenians, could they have been prevailed with to repel the ordinance against the Megarians, and to be reconciled to them, upon which account, since Pericles was the man who mainly opposed it and stirred up the people's passions to persist in their contention with the Megarians, he was regarded as the sole cause of the war. They say, moreover, that ambassadors went by order from Lacedaemon to Athens about this very business, and that when Pericles was urging a certain law which made it illegal to take down or withdraw the tablet of the decree, one of the ambassadors, Pericles by name, said, "Well, do not take it down then, but turn it. There is no law, I suppose, which forbids that." which, though prettily said, did not move Pericles from his resolution. Because that, keeping the letter of the law and obviously violating the spirit, something a policeman might arrest somebody for. And, a person may not get a lawyer that, there may have been, in all likelihood, something of a secret grudge and private animosity which he had against the Megarians. Yet, upon a public and open charge against them, they had appropriated part of the sacred land on the frontier. He proposed a decree that a herald should be sent to them, and the same also to the Lacedaemonians, with an accusation of the Megarians, an order which certainly shows equitable and friendly proceeding enough. And after that, the herald, who was sent by name Anthemocrates, died, and it was believed that the Megarians had contrived his death. Then Carinus proposed a decree against them, and there should be an irreconcilable and implacable enmity thenceforward betwixt the two commonwealths, and that if any one of the Megarians should but set his foot in Attica, he should be put to death, and that the commanders, when they take the usual oath, should, over and above that, swear that they will twice every year make an inroad into the Megarian country, and that Anthemocrates should be buried near the Thracian gates, which are now called Dipolon, or Double Gate. On the other hand, the Megarians, denying and disowning the murder of Anthemocrates, throw the whole matter upon Aspasia and Pericles, availing themselves of the famous verses in the Acarnians. To Megara some of our madcaps ran, and stole Simatha thence, their courtesan, which exploit the Megarians to outdo, came to Aspasia's house, and took off too. The true occasion of the quarrel is not so easy to find out, but of inducing the refusal to annul the decree. All alike charge Pericles. Some say he met the request with a positive refusal, out of high spirit and a view of the state's best interest, accounting that the demand made in those embassies was designed for a trial of their compliance, and that a concession will be taken for a confession of weakness, as if they durst not do otherwise, while some there are who say that it was rather out of arrogance and a wilful spirit of contention, to show his own strength, that he took occasion to slight the Lacedaemonians. The worst motive of all, which is confirmed by the most witnesses, is the following effect. Phidias, the molder, had, as has before been said, undertaken to make the statue of Minerva. Now he, being admitted to friendship with Pericles, and a great favorite of his, had many enemies upon this account, who envied and maligned him, who also to make trial in a case of his, what kind of judges the commons would prove, should there be occasion to bring Pericles himself before them, having tampered with Menon, one who had been a workman with Phidias, stationed him in the marketplace, with a petition desiring public security upon his discovery and impeachment of Phidias, the people admitting the man to tell his story, and the prosecution proceeding in the assembly. There was nothing of theft or cheat proved against him, for Phidias, from the very first beginning, by the advice of Pericles, had so wrought and wrapped the gold that was used in the work about the statue, that they might take it all off, and make out the just weight of it, which Pericles at that time bade the accuser do. But the reputation of his works was what brought envy upon Phidias, especially that where he represents the fight of the Amazons upon the female entity's shield. He had introduced a likeness of himself as a bald old man holding up a great stone with both hands, and had put in a very fine representation of Pericles fighting with an Amazon, and the position of the hand, which holds out the spear in front of the face, was ingeniously contrived to conceal in some degree the likeness, which meantime showed itself on either side. Well, usually, they wait generations before, or at least till after somebody's died, for the hero to be divinized, but, just sneaking it in, pictures of yourself and your buddies in the temple. Yeah. Phidias then was carried away to prison, and there died of a disease, but, as some say, a poison administered by the enemies of Pericles, to raise a slander or a suspicion, at least, as though he had procured it, the informer Menon, upon Glaucon's proposal, the people made free from payment of taxes and customs, and ordered the generals to take care that nobody should do him any hurt. About the same time, Aspasia was indicated of impiety, upon the complaint of Hermippus, the comedian, who also laid further to her charge that she received into her house freeborn women for the uses of Pericles, and Diopithus proposed a decree that public accusations should be laid against persons who neglected religion, or taught new doctrines about things above, directing suspicion by means of Anaxagoras against Pericles himself, the people receiving and admitting these accusations and complaints at length. By this means they came to enact a decree, at the motion of Dracontidas, that Pericles should bring in the accounts of the moneys he had expended, and lodge them with Cratinus, and that the judges carrying their suffrage from the altar in the Acropolis should examine and determine the business in the city. This last clause Hagnon took out of the decree, and moved that the causes should be tried before 1,500 jurors, whether they should be styled prosecutions for robbery or bribery, or any kind of malversation. Aspasia, Pericles begged off, shedding, as Aeschines says, many tears at the trial, and personally entreating the jurors, but fearing how it might go with Anaxagoras, he sent him out of the city, and finding that in Phidias's case he had miscarried with the people, being afraid of impeachment, he kindled the war which hitherto had lingered and smothered, and blew it up into a flame, hoping by that means to disperse and scatter these complaints and charges, and to allay their jealousy, the city usually throwing herself upon him alone, and trusting to his sole conduct upon the urgency of great affairs and public dangers, by reason of his authority and the sway he bore. These are given out to have been the reasons which induced Pericles not to suffer the people of Athens to yield to the proposals of the Lacedaemonians, but their truth is uncertain. The Lacedaemonians, for their part, feeling sure that if they could once remove him, they might be at what terms they pleased with the Athenians, sent them word that they should expel the pollution with which Pericles, on the mother's side was tainted, as Thucydides tells us. And, we people really aren't tainted by their ancestry as such, but the issue proved quite contrary to what those who sent the message expected. Instead of bringing Pericles under suspicion and reproach, they raised him into yet greater credit and esteem with the citizens, as a man whom their enemies most hated and feared, in the same way also before Archidamus, who was at the head of the Peloponnesians, made his invasion into Attica. He told the Athenians beforehand that if Archidamus, while he laid waste the rest of the country, should forbear and spare his estate, either on the ground of friendship or right of hospitality that was betwixt them, or on purpose to give his enemies an occasion of traducing him, that then he did freely bestow upon the state all his land and the buildings upon it for the public use. The Lacedaemonians, therefore, and their allies, with a great army, invaded the Athenian territories under the conduct of King Archidamus, and laying waste the country, marched on as far as Acharna, and there pitched their camp, presuming that the Athenians would never endure that, but would come out and fight them for their country's and their honor's sake. But Pericles looked upon it as dangerous to engage in battle, to the risk of the city itself, against 60,000 men at arms of Peloponnesians and Boeotians, for so many they were in number, that made the inroad at first, and he endeavored to appease those who were desirous to fight, and who were grieved and discontented to see how things went, and gave them good words, saying that trees, when they are lopped and cut, grow up again in a short time, but men having once lost cannot easily be recovered. He did not convene the people into an assembly, for fear lest they should force him to act against his judgment, but like a skilful steersman or pilot of a ship, who, when a sudden squall comes on out at sea, makes all his arrangements, sees that all is tight and fast, and then follows the dictates of his skill, and minds the business of the ship, taking no notice of the tears and entreaties of the seasick and fearful passengers. So he, having shut up the city gates, and placed guards at all posts for security, followed his own reason and judgment, little regarding those that cried out against him, and were angry at his management, although there were a great many of his friends that urged him with requests, and many of his enemies threatened and accused him for doing as he did, and many made songs and lampoons upon him, which were sung about the town to his disgrace, reproaching him with the cowardly exercise of his office of general, and the tame abandonment of everything to the enemy's hands. Cleon also already was among his assailants, making use of the feeling against him as a step to the leadership of the people, as appears in the anapastic verses of Hermippus. Satire king instead of swords, will you always handle words? Very brave indeed we find them, but Attalus lurks behind them. Yet gnash your teeth, you're seen, when the little dagger keen, whetted every day anew, of sharp Cleon touches you. Pericles, however, was not at all moved by any attacks, but took all patiently and submitted in silence to the disgrace they threw upon him, and the ill will they bore him, and sending out a fleet of 100 galleys to Peloponnesus, he did not go along with it in person, but stayed behind, that he might watch at home and keep the city under his own control, till the Peloponnesians broke up their camp and were gone. Yet to soothe the common people, jaded and distressed with the war, he relieved them with distributions of public moneys, and ordered new divisions of subject land, for having turned out all the people of Aegina, he parted the land among the Athenians according to lot, some comfort also, and ease in their miseries, they might receive from what their enemies endured. For the fleet, sailing round the Peloponnese, ravaged a great deal of the country, and pillaged and plundered the towns and smaller cities, and by land he himself entered with an army the Megarian country, and made havoc of it all. Whence it is clear that the Peloponnesians, though they did the Athenians much mischief by land, yet suffering as much themselves from them by sea, would not have protracted the war to such a length, but would quickly have given it over, as Pericles at first foretold they would, had not some divine power crossed human purposes. In the first place, the pestilential disease or plague seized upon the city and ate up all the flower and prime of their youth and strength, upon occasion of which the people, distempered and afflicted in their souls as well as in their bodies, were utterly enraged like madmen against Pericles, and like patients grown delirious, sought to lay violent hands on their physician, or as it were their father. Now, one of the things that, we came across minutes ago is this idea of restricting, no new religious stuff. Well, is it really new religious stuff, or is it just revived old stuff? And it questions the validity of what's arose. If no one can speak critically or differently, it questions the strength of what's there. It's like, well, would people choose it if they had an option? They had been possessed by their physician, or as it were their father. They had been possessed by his enemies with the belief that the occasion of the plague was the crowding of the country people together into the town, forced as they were now in the heat of the summer weather to dwell many of them together even as they could in small tenements and stifling hovels, and to be tied to a lazy course of life within doors, whereas before they lived in a pure, open, and free air. The cause and author of this, said they, is he on whose account of the war has poured a multitude of people in upon us within the walls, and uses all these men that he has here upon no employ or service, but keeps them pent up like cattle, to be overrun with infection from one another, affording them neither shift of quarters nor any refreshment. With the design to remedy these evils and do the enemy some inconvenience, Pericles got 150 galleys ready, and having embarked many tried soldiers, both foot and horse, was about to sail out, giving great hope to his citizens and no less alarm to his enemies, upon the sight of so great a force. And now the vessels having their complement of men, and Pericles being gone aboard his own galley, it happened that the sun was eclipsed, and it grew dark on a sudden, to the affright of all, for this was looked upon as extremely ominous. Pericles, therefore, perceiving the steersman seized with fear and at a loss what to do, took his cloak and held it up before the man's face, and screening him with it so that he could not see, asked him whether he imagined there was any great hurt, or the sign of any great hurt in this, and he answered no. Why, said he, and what does that differ from this? Only that what has caused that darkness there is something greater than a cloak. This is a story which philosophers tell their scholars. Pericles, however, after putting out to sea, seems not to have done any other exploit befitting such preparations, and when he had laid siege to the holy city Epidaurus, which gave him some hope of surrender, miscarried in his design by reason of the sickness, for it not only seized upon the Athenians, but upon all others too that held it, not only seized at that held any sort of communication with the army, finding after this the Athenians ill affected and highly displeased with him, he tried and endeavored what he could to appease and re-encourage them. But he could not pacify or allay their anger, nor persuade or prevail with them any way, till they freely passed their votes upon him, resumed their power, took away his command from him, and fined him in a sum of money which, by their account, that say least, was 15 talents, while they who reckoned most named 50. The name prefixed to the accusation was Cleon, as Idomeneus tells us. Simmias, according to Theophrastus, and Heraclides Ponticus, gives it as Lacretidas. And eclipses are an important thing to use spiritually. The response of it, can help one's reputation, or one can use one's reputation towards the means that you're using it towards.